the mountain that even indigenous tribes avoided. A place where, for more than a century, hunters, children, and hikers vanished, and not one of them was ever found. Official reports list accidents or voluntary disappearances. But how do you explain search dogs stopping in the exact same spot, as if encountering an invisible barrier? Why does the same detail appear again and again in the documents? A red jacket, a grey mist, and a silence so absolute that even the forest seems to fall quiet. What happens inside this triangle where time behaves differently and footprints simply dissolve into the ground? This is not folklore. This is an investigation into real people who vanished, and why no one has been able to explain what truly happened there. On December 1st, 1946, 18-year-old Bennington College student Paula Jean Weldon became the first in a series of unexplained disappearances, later referred to as the Bennington Triangle phenomenon. According to case files preserved in the Vermont State Police archives, Weldon was the eldest of 4 daughters of William Archibald Weldon, an industrial designer for the R. Copper and Brass Company in Stamford, Connecticut. At the time of her disappearance, she was a sophomore at Bennington College and lived in Dewey Hall. Her roommate, Elizabeth Johnson, stated in her deposition dated December 2nd, 1946, that Paula spent Sunday morning in the dormitory. Johnson noted that Paula seemed thoughtful, but not distressed. When asked about her plans for the day, Paula replied that she intended to go for a walk. Meteorological reports for December 1st show unusually warm winter weather. 50 degrees Fahrenheit, clear skies, light wind. These conditions are critical for understanding the timeline that followed. At 2:45 p.m., Weldon left the dormitory wearing a red parka, jeans, and light sneakers. She carried no backpack, food, water, or warm clothing. According to Johnson, Paula said she planned to walk on the long trail and return in time for dinner. 2:45 p.m. Leaves dormitory. Approximately 3 p.m. Seen on Route 67A near the college entrance. 3:10 p.m. Picked up by local contractor Lewis Knapp, according to his sworn statement from December 3rd, 1946. I gave a young woman a ride from the crossroads to my house on Route 9, about 2 miles. I let her out near the road leading to the long trail at roughly 3:15. She thanked me and walked toward the trail. The key witnesses became James and Martha Welch of Massachusetts. In their testimony given under oath on December 4th, 1946, they stated, they were hiking on the long trail for a short afternoon walk. Around 3:45 p.m., a young woman in a red parka passed them. They exchanged greetings. She asked how far it was to the summit. They replied, about 3 miles. She thanked them and continued ahead. They watched her walk approximately 100 yards before she disappeared around a bend near a large boulder. When we reached the same bend a minute or two later, she was no longer in sight. The trail ahead was visible for a quarter mile. There were no side paths. To the left was an incline. To the right, a steep drop. The Welches were the last confirmed witnesses to see Paula Weldon. December 2nd, noon. Concern escalates when Paula does not attend classes. The college administration contacts local authorities and her father. December 2nd. Unofficial searches by students. December 3rd. Official search begins. December 3rd to 17th. Large-scale operation involving around 1,000 people. December 17th. Search suspended due to heavy snowfall. Participants included approximately 300 Bennington students and faculty, approximately 400 local volunteers, approximately 150 Vermont National Guard personnel, search dogs from 3 states. Official reports highlight major issues. No centralized command structure. Significant overlap in search areas, others left unchecked. Search dogs refusing to proceed past a specific point. According to canine handler Robert Stevens, 3 independent dogs exhibited identical behavior at the Boulder area where Weldon was last seen. Each dog stopped, became agitated, and refused to continue. Paula's father, William Weldon, arrived in Vermont on December 4th and publicly criticized local authorities. In his press statement on December 7th, he argued, "The absence of a state police force in Vermont resulted in disorganized searches. There is no professional search and rescue unit. The county sheriff has no experience with such operations. Critical time has been lost." Weldon hired private investigators and offered a $5,000 reward for information. Between December 3rd and 30th, authorities received 72 reports of possible sightings. A Rutland train conductor claimed to have seen her on the evening of December 1st. A waitress in Springfield, Massachusetts, identified her from a photo. A bus driver on the Bennington-Manchester route reported a similar passenger. All leads proved false. Witnesses misremembered dates or confused Paula with other young women. On December 17, 1946, severe snowstorms forced the suspension of active searches. By then, more than 100 square miles had been examined. The winter of 1946–47 brought record snowfall, over 120 inches. Searches resumed in April 1947 after the thaw, but no traces were ever found. No clothing, no personal items, no remains. Paula Weldon simply vanished. The disappearance of Paula Weldon exposed significant weaknesses in Vermont's law enforcement system. As a result of public pressure and advocacy led by William Weldon, the Vermont State Police was officially established on July 7, 1947. The founding legislative act stated that the tragic events surrounding Miss Weldon's disappearance demonstrated the urgent need for a professional agency capable of coordinating search and rescue operations and investigating crimes across the entire state. The case of Paula Weldon remains open. The essential questions have never been answered. How could a person vanish on a straight trail with no side paths? Why did the search dogs refuse to go beyond a specific point? If an accident occurred, where did the body go? Why was no piece of clothing or any personal item ever recovered? Weldon's disappearance became the first in a sequence of unexplained vanishings around Glastenbury Mountain. Over the next 4 years, within a 10-mile radius of the location where she was last seen, 4 more people would disappear under similar circumstances. This cluster of cases later became known as the Bennington Triangle, and is now considered one of the most enigmatic chapters in New England's criminal history. Glastenbury Mountain rises 3,748 feet in the southern section of Vermont's Green Mountains. Its summit lies at 42 degrees 52 minutes 48 seconds north and 73 degrees 3 minutes 36 seconds west. The mountain sits on the boundary between the towns of Glastenbury and Somerset, both of which were already abandoned by the time Paula Weldon disappeared. The surrounding terrain consists of dense, mixed forests, dominated by maple, birch, and spruce. Steep slopes with elevation changes reaching 2,000 feet, numerous streams and marshy areas, frequent fog, sudden weather shifts, and magnetic anomalies documented by the United States Geological Survey. According to Smithsonian Institution ethnographic records from 1885, the indigenous Abenaki people avoided the Glastenbury Mountain region. Anthropologist James Mooney documented their beliefs. The Abenaki referred to the mountain as the place where winds collide. Their stories describe a spirit at the summit that consumes people. Informants refused to climb beyond a certain elevation, roughly 2,000 feet. Missionary Joseph Laurent recorded accounts in 1844, stating that the indigenous inhabitants spoke of a stone on the mountain that opens and swallows a person. They claimed several hunters disappeared there over the years. Local guides refused to lead settlers through specific sections of the area. In the archives of the Vermont Historical Society, an 1820 map contains markings in the Abenaki language. A translation completed in 1972 identified designations of dangerous places around Glastenbury Mountain. 7 locations were marked, forming an almost perfect circle with a radius of about 10 miles. The first documented disappearance of a white settler in the Glastenbury area occurred in 1836. According to notes from the Bennington County Sheriff, a 34-year-old farmer named John Hanson vanished on October 12th while hunting deer. A search party of 20 men found no trace. The dogs lost the scent at the base of the mountain. Hanson's wife stated that he had spoken the day before about strange lights on the slope. Subsequent cases followed. In 1852, 2 loggers disappeared. In 1867, a surveyor named Thomas Wright went missing. In 1874, a schoolteacher, Mary Carpenter, failed to return from the forest. In 1889, an entire family of 3 disappeared. In total, archives record 23 disappearances between 1836 and 1940. Not a single body was ever recovered. The town of Glastenbury was founded in 1761. Its population peaked at 241 residents in 1880. The main occupations included logging, charcoal production, and small-scale iron ore extraction. According to the 1890 census, Glastenbury exhibited an unusually high rate of mortality and mental illness. Over the previous decades, 8 unexplained deaths and 12 cases of severe mental disturbance had been documented. By 1920, the population had dropped to 7 people. The last remaining family left the town in 1937. The Vermont legislature formally dissolved Glastenbury as an incorporated municipality on April 1, 1937. The minutes of the session stated that, due to the absence of permanent residents and the inability to maintain municipal services, the town would be disincorporated and placed under direct state administration. A similar fate befell the neighbouring town of Somerset, which was dissolved the same year. Both areas became unincorporated territories, a rare designation in New England. A report from the Bennington Banner, published on November 15, 1892, describes a notable incident. A stagecoach belonging to the Vermont Stage Company, travelling from Bennington to Wilmington, vanished with all passengers. It was last seen near Fay's Tavern, 4 miles from Glastenbury Mountain. On board were the driver, Henry McDowell, and 4 passengers. 3 days later, the horses returned to Bennington without their harnesses. Search parties later found the stagecoach in the forest, half a mile from the road. The doors were open. Luggage remained inside. There were no signs of struggle. Both passengers and driver were gone. The unresolved question is how a heavy stagecoach arrived in a part of the forest inaccessible to any road. The Vermont Geological Survey conducted an investigation of the area in 1912. According to the report by Chief Geologist Charles Adams, the rock formations of Glastenbury Mountain contain an unusual mineral composition with a high concentration of magnetite. Localized magnetic anomalies were documented, causing compass deviations of up to 30 degrees. 3 locations showed zones of abnormally low atmospheric pressure, unexplained by the surrounding terrain. A follow-up study in 1934 confirmed the presence of these anomalies and identified additional features, including periodic infrasound vibrations at a frequency of 16 to 18 Hz, local temperature contrasts of up to 15 degrees within a distance of 100 feet, and unexplained radio interference in certain areas. Dr. Edward Stevenson of the Vermont State Hospital published a study in 1935 on the effects of living in the Glastenbury area on mental health. His main findings were the following. During the observation period from 1920 to 1935, the incidence of mental disorders was 3 times higher than the state average. The most common symptoms were hallucinations, paranoid states, and unexplained anxiety. 70% of former residents interviewed reported hearing voices in the forest and feeling watched. 50% experienced unexplained memory gaps. Vermont folklore contains a legend about a mysterious hermit said to have lived on the mountain in the late 19th century. The story appears in Mary Wilkins' 1908 collection, Legends of the Green Mountains. Hunters described encounters with a wild man of exceptional height, covered in hair, who appeared and vanished without leaving a trace, except for footprints measuring 18 inches. Some believed he was the restless spirit of the first person who ever disappeared on the mountain, doomed to wander forever. Reports of the wild man continued until 1942. 19 encounters were documented in total, including testimony from forest ranger Robert Carr, who in 1939 discovered enormous barefoot tracks at an elevation of 3,000 feet in the snow. Declassified documents from the United States Department of Defense reveal that secret military exercises were held near Glastenbury Mountain in the autumn of 1942. The operation was codenamed Green Mist. According to a report by Colonel James Wright, the personnel of an entire company disappeared during a night march on October 4th. 17 soldiers vanished on a stretch of trail several miles long. Searches using dogs produced no results. Radio communication in the disappearance zone was completely lost. The exercise was halted, and the area was declared off-limits for future military operations. The fate of the 17 soldiers remains unknown. Their names are still listed among those missing in the United States during peacetime. In 1945, University of Vermont professor Henry Lawrence proposed a theory regarding the existence of geomagnetic traps in the Glastenbury region. These were defined as zones where a combination of magnetic anomalies, infrasound, and atmospheric conditions could cause disorientation and hallucinations. In his article for the Journal of Anomalous Phenomena, he wrote that a person entering such a zone could lose their sense of direction, experience panic, and walk away from safety instead of toward it. Infrasound at frequencies of 16 to 18 Hz is capable of inducing irrational fear and visual hallucinations. This, he argued, could explain why people leave marked trails and are unable to find their way back. Lawrence's theory, however, did not explain the complete absence of remains, or the cases where individuals disappeared in full view of witnesses, as in the disappearance of Paula Weldon. By the time Weldon vanished in December 1946, Glastenbury Mountain already carried a severe reputation. Local residents avoided it. Hiking routes bypassed the area. But for a young college student from Connecticut, it appeared to be nothing more than a scenic summit for a Sunday walk. She became the first of several victims in a new wave of disappearances that unfolded over the next 4 years. On November 12, 1945, 1 year and 19 days before Paula Weldon disappeared, a 74-year-old man named Midi Rivers vanished under unexplained circumstances in the same region. His case is significant because Rivers was not an inexperienced tourist, but a man who had spent more than 50 years in these forests. James Midi Rivers, whose full name rarely appears in the records, was known almost exclusively by his nickname. He was born in 1871 in Bennington. According to local archives, his occupations were hunter, guide, and logger. He had been widowed since 1932 and lived on Narrows Road, 5 miles from Bennington. Despite his age, his physical condition was excellent. As stated by local game warden Frank Carpenter, Midi knew those forests better than any living person. He had been leading hunting parties since he was 16 and could find his way even in total darkness. In 58 years, he had never once been lost. On November 9, 1945, Rivers left for his annual hunting trip with 4 companions. His son, James Rivers Jr., aged 42, his son-in-law Lowell Pierce, aged 38, his grandson David Pierce, aged 16, and a family friend, Henry McDowell, aged 61. The group set up camp in Bickford Hollow, about 4 miles northwest of Bennington and 7 miles from Glastenbury Mountain. Rivers knew the area intimately. He had hunted there since 1887. According to the testimony of James Rivers Jr., given on November 13, 1945, the group was returning to camp around 2 in the afternoon after a morning hunt. They walked single file along a familiar trail. Rivers was at the rear, as usual, making sure no one fell behind. At a fork in the trail, James turned to signal his father which direction they were taking. He was no longer there. The distance between them had been no more than 75 yards. The testimony of Henry McDowell adds further detail. He stated that he had been walking second to last, directly ahead of Midi. He heard Rivers' footsteps close behind him, no more than 20 yards away. When the group paused at a small stream, roughly a quarter-mile from the camp, they noticed that Midi was gone. They immediately retraced their steps. There were no footprints or disturbances. It was as if he had vanished into the air. The initial search began at once, carried out by the hunting group. When Rivers did not appear by evening, James Jr. went to Bennington to seek help. The search timeline unfolded as follows. November 13th. The official search began with 75 people. November 14th to 16th. Expanded searches involving 300 volunteers. November 17th to 21st. Military assistance from Fort Devens, Massachusetts. November 22nd to 28th. Searches using National Guard aircraft. More than 500 people participated in total. Over 50 square miles were examined. According to the report of search leader Sheriff Clyde Price, the dogs picked up Rivers' trail at the point where he was last seen. It followed the path for about 150 yards, then abruptly veered into the forest. The trail ended 50 feet into the forest. 3 independent dogs produced the same result. At the point where the scent stopped, there was a flat clearing with no features in the terrain. Experienced tracker Joseph Otis provided a statement. In 40 years of tracking both game and people, he had never seen anything similar. The trail simply ended. There were no signs that the person had climbed a tree, hidden, or been carried away. The ground was soft after rainfall. Any movement would have left prints. There were none. On May 18, 1946, 6 months after the disappearance, hiker Paul Jackson found a single .30-30 cartridge on a trail 3 miles from the area where Rivers was last seen. Beside it was a handkerchief marked with the initials MR. Forensic analysis confirmed that the cartridge matched the type Rivers used, and his daughter identified the handkerchief. However, the location of the discovery raised questions. This section of trail had been thoroughly searched in November, and nothing had been found there. The theory of an accident did not withstand scrutiny. Rivers was one of the most experienced woodsmen in the region. The weather was clear, visibility excellent, and he knew the terrain intimately. No body or remains were ever found. The theory of voluntary disappearance was dismissed as well. Rivers had no debts, no legal issues, and no personal conflicts. He was deeply attached to his family, especially his grandchildren. He left a significant sum of money and important documents at home. There was no motive for staging a disappearance. Several characteristics of the case would later appear in other incidents. A disappearance on familiar terrain, vanishing in daylight under good weather conditions, the abrupt end of a trail in a featureless area, search dogs refusing to continue past a specific point, and personal items later found in locations previously examined. In an interview recorded in 1970, Rivers' daughter Mary gave additional context. She stated that her father had behaved strangely a week before he vanished. He said something in the forest had changed. The birds behaved differently, and the trails seemed unfamiliar. We assumed it was age, but he was not the type of man who imagined things. The last thing he told me was, "If anything happens, do not look for me where I disappear. I will not be there." The search was officially terminated on November 29, 1945. Based on the conclusion of the state investigator, James Midi Rivers was declared missing. The probable cause was listed as an accident followed by disorientation. The body was presumed lost due to the difficulty of the terrain and the activity of wild animals. This conclusion failed to address the central mystery. How could one of the region's most skilled guides vanish without a trace on a familiar trail only 150 yards behind his group? After Rivers' disappearance, local hunters began avoiding the Bickford Hollow area. According to records of the Bennington Hunting Club for the 1946 season, 30% fewer hunting licenses were issued for the northwestern sector. The reason cited was superstitious fear following the Rivers case. Several hunters reported feelings of unease and the sensation of being watched. The disappearance of Midi Rivers became the first in a series of unexplained vanishings between 1945 and 1950. Distinctive elements of his case would repeat in the others. The suddenness of the disappearance, the lack of tracks, the unusual behavior of search dogs, and the later appearance of items in places that had already been examined. When, a year later, Paula Weldon vanished in the same region, many were reminded of Rivers. Long-time residents began speaking of a curse returning to the forests of Vermont, while authorities continued to attribute the events to accidents, unwilling to acknowledge the possibility of an unexplained phenomenon. The case of Midi Rivers remains unsolved. His name stands at the beginning of the list of those associated with the Bennington Triangle, the first among many who walked into the forest and did not return, as though stepping across an invisible boundary between this world and something else. On December 1st, 1949, exactly 3 years after Paula Weldon's disappearance, the most inexplicable incident in the history of the Bennington Triangle occurred. 68-year-old World War I veteran James Tetford vanished from an intercity bus in front of 14 passengers. According to the records of the Vermont Soldiers' Home in Bennington, his full name was James Edward Tetford. He was born on March 14, 1881. He served as a private in the 312th Infantry Division from 1917 to 1918. He was married. His wife, Pearl Tetford, had gone missing in 1946. His health records noted chronic depression following his wife's disappearance, but otherwise satisfactory physical condition. On November 28, 1949, Tetford received permission to visit relatives in St. Albans, a town in northern Vermont. The soldier's home logbook states that he left on November 28 at 8 in the morning. His purpose was to visit family, with a planned return on December 1st. According to the testimony of relatives, the visit was uneventful. His cousin Florence McGinn stated that James was in better spirits than usual and said he was looking forward to returning to Bennington, where his friends from the card group were waiting for him. On December 1st, at approximately 2:15 in the afternoon, Tetford boarded a Vermont Transit Company bus travelling from St. Albans to Bennington via Burlington and Rutland. Witnesses to the boarding included Florence McGinn and her husband, who accompanied him to the station. Ticket clerk Robert Price sold him the ticket and remembered him. Driver Ernest George recorded his boarding in the trip log. The bus arrived in Burlington at around 4:30 p.m. According to passenger Albert Rosenberg, Tetford was seated across the aisle from him. In Burlington, Tetford stepped out to stretch his legs. Rosenberg did the same. They chatted briefly about the weather. Tetford bought a newspaper and a bottle of cola. They reboarded the bus together. Another important witness was Samuel Godfrey, an old acquaintance of Tetford. He met James at the Burlington station and spoke with him for about 5 minutes. He was completely coherent. Nothing unusual in his behaviour. He said he was going back home to Bennington. I watched him get back on the bus. The bus departed Burlington at 5 p.m. The next scheduled stop was Rutland, around 7 p.m. Passenger accounts from the Burlington-Rutland segment include the following. Mary Henson, a housewife, recalled that the man in the military jacket was dozing by the window. She noted it because he snored. About half an hour before Rutland, the snoring stopped. Thomas O'Brien, a salesman seated behind Tetford, saw him reading a newspaper under the overhead lamp. Then the light went out, and he assumed Tetford had fallen asleep. The driver, Ernest George, stated that before arriving in Rutland, he checked the passengers through the rear-view mirror. Tetford was in his seat. The driver remembered the military coat. According to George's statement, the bus arrived in Rutland, where he announced a 20-minute stop. Several passengers stepped outside, including the woman with a child who had been seated next to Tetford. She later confirmed that Tetford remained in the bus, asleep. Station conductor Paul Simpson inspected the bus as required. He counted 9 remaining passengers. The elderly man by the window in the 5th row was asleep. He did not wake him. The bus departed Rutland at 8:10 p.m. The distance to Bennington was about 45 miles. Travel time was approximately 1 hour. There were no stops along this stretch. Passenger statements about the final segment were inconsistent. Albert Rosenberg said he dozed off after Rutland but woke shortly before Bennington and noticed Tetford's seat was empty. He assumed Tetford had moved. Mary Henson believed she saw his silhouette by the window halfway through the trip, but it was dark, and she admitted she could have been mistaken. A firm statement came from Richard Green, a student, who said that about 10 minutes before reaching Bennington, he stood up to stretch and clearly saw the man in the military jacket still in his seat, asleep. The bus arrived at the Bennington station at 9:25 p.m. According to the driver's report, he announced the final stop and switched on the overhead lights. Passengers began gathering their belongings and exiting. The driver then noticed that seat 5, where Tetford had been sitting, was empty. On the seat were his travel bag and the bus timetable, open to the St Albans Bennington route. The driver and the station supervisor conducted a thorough search. They checked the restroom, which had been locked from the outside since Burlington. They checked the luggage compartment. Its lock was intact. They checked under all the seats. The emergency exit seal was unbroken. James Tetford was no longer on the bus. The Soldiers' Home reported him missing on December 8th, when he failed to return within a week. Police opened an investigation. A review confirmed that Tetford had not exited at any intermediate stop. No one had seen him leave the bus. The doors had not opened between Rutland and Bennington. The route included no unscheduled stops. All 14 passengers were interviewed. Their accounts differed in detail but agreed on the essential point. Tetford was still on the bus after Rutland, and no one saw him disappear. Detective Michael Unor examined Tetford's seat. He noted that the upholstery felt cold, even though the bus had arrived only 15 minutes earlier. By comparison, the adjacent seat, where no one had sat for the last hour, still retained warmth from the heater. It was as if a source of cold had occupied seat 5. Dorothy Parker, a cleaner at the station, testified that she cleaned that bus after midnight. In the crack between the cushions of seat 5, she found a torn piece of paper bearing the words, "I cannot return," written in a shaky hand. She turned it over to police. Handwriting analysis confirmed that the message belonged to Tetford. In the next part, we'll continue examining the strange events surrounding Tetford's final journey, the testimonies that don't align, and the theories investigators still cannot fully explain. Click through to part 2, because from here, the story only becomes more unsettling.